Okay, so have you ever had something like really precious taken from you?
Hmm.
But not just taken, but like completely dismissed. Like it just meant nothing to the person who took it.
Oh, yeah. I can imagine that would be.
Yeah, that's kind of at the heart of what we're looking at today.
Right.
It all comes from a video titled AITA for Pawning My Stepmother's Gold Ring .mp4.
Ooh, that sounds juicy.
It is, and it really got me thinking.
Okay, so what's the backstory here?
Well, this listener who posted the video is 22 years old and still living at home.
Okay.
And he describes how his stepmother sold his collection of vintage baseball cards.
Baseball cards, huh? Those can be worth a lot.
Oh, yeah, especially vintage ones. But it sounds like in this case, it wasn't really about the money.
Hmm. Okay, I'm listening.
These cards were a gift from his late uncle, so
Oh.
they had a ton of sentimental value for him, you know?
Yeah, those objects that link us to people we've lost, they can be priceless.
Right. It's like holding a piece of that person and that part of your life.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And when someone disrespects those objects, it feels like they're disrespecting that connection.
And that's where the stepmother's actions just make you cringe. She sold the cards at a flea market without even asking.
Wow. No warning, nothing.
Nope. She just decided to declutter, as she put it.
Declutter by getting rid of someone else's prized possessions. That's harsh.
And get this, she didn't even remember who she sold them to. Just told him to let it go because it's just stuff.
Ouch. That's gotta hurt. I can see why this listener's reaching out for a sanity check.
Seriously, hearing her say that made me kind of defensive on his behalf.
That's like she's totally invalidating his feelings.
Yeah.
Those cards represented a part of his life, a part of him, and she just tossed them aside.
Exactly. And that's not even the worst part. Later on, this listener finds his stepmom's lost gold ring.
A gold ring. Okay, interesting.
And the kicker is that she had previously accused him of stealing it.
Ooh, so there's some history there, some tension.
Oh, yeah, tons. So
Yeah.
finding that ring must have felt like karma.
I can see how that could be tempting.
Right.
Did he take it?
He did. He pawned the ring, got a decent chunk of change for it, and then he confronted his stepmother.
Okay, confrontation time.
Yeah.
This is where it gets good.
Oh, yeah, it does.
Yeah.
When she realized the ring was missing, he basically said, if my things didn't matter to you, then your ring shouldn't matter to me.
Mic drop moment.
Wow.
So he basically gave her a taste of her own medicine.
Exactly. It's that classic eye for an eye impulse.
It's totally understandable, but is it justice? Or does it just create more problems?
Well, that's what I'm curious about. Does revenge ever really bring satisfaction, or does it just escalate things?
Right, because now you've got two rungs instead of one. And where does that lead?
And according to the video, it led to a whole lot of family drama. The father was stuck in the middle. The stepmother was playing the victim.
Sounds like the house turned into a war zone.
Pretty much. So we've got this tangle of hurt feelings, bad decisions, and a family that's clearly fractured.
It's a good example of how quickly things can spiral out of control.
And it makes me wonder, was there any way to avoid this whole mess? Could they have communicated better, made different choices?
Those are the questions we're going to be exploring right after the break.
Yeah.
You know what really gets to me about this whole thing? Is that it just shows how much we all need to feel validated.
Right.
Like our feelings matter. Our experiences matter.
Totally. And it seems like the listener was really trying to get that across to his stepmom.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He treasured those cards. They were a link to his past, to his uncle, and she just brushed it off.
It's almost like she was saying, your feelings about this don't matter.
Yeah, it's a form of emotional invalidation. You know?
Yeah, and it can be so hurtful, especially coming from family.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We expect our families to understand us, to respect our feelings.
So it makes sense that the listener felt so betrayed and angry.
It really does. And it
Yeah.
brings us back to that central question. Am I the a-hole for pawning the ring?
Right. On the surface, it seems like straightforward retaliation, an eye for an eye.
But I think there's more to it than that, don't you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he was obviously hurting.
Right. He was lashing out because he felt powerless.
So maybe his reaction wasn't the best, but it was understandable.
It was a human response to feeling hurt and disrespected.
It's like hurt people hurt people.
Exactly. Which brings up another question. Does inflicting pain on someone who's hurt you actually make you feel better?
Good point. Does it really bring satisfaction?
Or does it just perpetuate the cycle of hurt?
I was actually reading about the psychology of revenge the other day.
Really?
Yeah, and studies show that getting even doesn't actually make us feel better in the long run.
Interesting.
Often it just leaves us feeling empty or even more conflicted.
That makes sense. You're not addressing the underlying issues, just creating more pain.
Exactly. And in this case, it definitely backfired. The family's fractured trust is broken.
It's a classic lose-lose situation.
So if we could rewind, what would a healthier approach have looked like?
Well, for starters, the stepmother could have communicated her intentions.
Instead of just assuming he wouldn't care about the cards?
Exactly.
Yeah.
She could have acknowledged their sentimental value and asked for his input.
Yeah, like, hey, I'm thinking about decluttering. Would you mind if I sold some of these things? Or maybe we could donate them together.
Something like that. Anything to show respect for his feelings?
It's easy to assume that others understand our perspective, but communication is key.
Especially in families. And even more so in step-families.
Oh, definitely. Those dynamics can be extra tricky.
Absolutely. It takes a lot of effort to build trust and create a sense of unity in blended families.
And clear communication is the foundation for all of that.
Couldn't agree more.
So it sounds like both the listener and the stepmother could have benefited from a communication crash course.
Maybe a family meeting with a mediator.
Yeah, someone neutral to help facilitate the conversation.
That can be really helpful.
Yeah.
It creates a safe space for everyone to feel heard.
And sometimes all it takes is taking a step back and trying to see things from the other person's perspective.
Exactly. Putting yourself in their shoes.
Because you never really know what's going on in someone else's heart.
That's so true. We all have our own stories, our own wounds that shape how we react.
So maybe the stepmother had her own reasons for wanting to declutter so badly.
It's definitely possible.
Right.
We often project our own experiences onto others without even realizing it.
Like maybe she had a past experience with hoarding or some kind of loss.
Right. And that could be influencing her actions in the present.
That's not to excuse her behavior, but it does add another layer of complexity.
It reminds us that we're all human. We all make mistakes.
Yeah, and we all have room to grow.
Absolutely. So let's shift gears for a second and focus on the listener.
Okay.
What could he have done differently? Besides pawning the ring, of course.
That's a good question. What do you think?
He could have tried to express his hurt to his stepmom. Explain the significance of the cards.
Instead of resorting to retaliation.
Right. What if he had said something like, I understand you're trying to declutter, but those cards are incredibly special to me because they were a gift from my uncle. Is there any way we can find a compromise?
The power of I feel statements.
Exactly. It's so much more effective than accusing or attacking.
By expressing his emotions clearly and respectfully, he might have been able to connect with her on a deeper level.
And who knows, maybe she would have been more understanding.
It's all about finding ways to bridge that gap in communication.
To see each other's perspectives and find a solution that works for everyone.
This whole situation has been quite a roller coaster.
It really has. We've covered so much ground. Sentimental value family dynamics, the psychology of revenge.
Communication, empathy, step-family relationships, it's a lot to unpack.
And we've only scratched the surface.
It's amazing how one story can reveal so much about human nature.
So back to the original question. Was the listener justified in his actions?
I guess we'll leave that up to our listeners to decide.
I hope this deep dive has given you all some food for thought.
And maybe even inspired you to reflect on your own experiences with conflict and communication.
Because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to figure this thing called life out.
And sometimes we make mistakes. Sometimes we hurt each other.
But hopefully we learn from those experiences and grow as individuals.
And as a society.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So until next time, keep those conversations flowing, keep exploring, keep learning.
And remember, empathy is everything.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the fascinating world of human nature. I mean, like maybe a family meeting would have helped, right?
Yeah, maybe. With like a neutral third party, someone to kind of mediate the conversation.
Right. Someone to help keep things calm and make sure everyone feels heard.
Exactly. Because sometimes when emotions are running high, it's hard to listen to each other.
Oh, totally. It's like everyone's just waiting for their turn to speak instead of actually trying to understand the other person's point of view.
And that's where a mediator can be so helpful. They can create that safe space for everyone to express themselves.
And maybe even help them see things from a different perspective.
Exactly. Because sometimes we get so caught up in our own hurt and anger that we forget to consider the other person's side of the story.
Like in this case, maybe the stepmother had her own reasons for wanting to declutter so badly. Maybe it wasn't just about getting rid of stuff.
Right. Maybe she had some underlying emotional baggage that we don't know about.
Like, what if she had a bad experience with hoarding in the past? Or maybe she lost someone close to her and it triggered some kind of anxiety about possessions.
It's definitely possible. We often project our own experiences onto others without even realizing it.
Yeah, like maybe she was trying to protect the listener in some way. Or maybe she was just trying to cope with her own grief.
It's not to excuse her behavior, but it does make you think.
It reminds us that everyone has their own story.
Exactly. And their own wounds that might be influencing their actions.
So it's important to try to be understanding, even when it's hard.
Absolutely. Empathy is key.
Okay, so let's flip it back to the listener for a second.
Okay.
What could he have done differently? Besides pawning the ring, of course.
Well, instead of retaliating, what if he had tried to explain to his stepmother how much those cards meant to him?
Yeah, like, hey, I know you're trying to declutter, but those cards were a gift from my uncle and they're really special to me.
Exactly. He could have expressed his hurt and asked if there was any way to find a compromise.
Ah, the power of I feel statements.
Right? Instead of blaming or accusing, he could have focused on communicating his emotions and needs.
And that might have opened up a whole different kind of conversation.
It's all about building bridges instead of walls.
So much of this comes down to communication, doesn't it?
It really does. When we communicate effectively, we can avoid so many misunderstandings and conflicts.
And when we listen with empathy, we can start to heal those rifts that inevitably occur in any relationship.
So true. Because at the end of the day, we all just want to feel seen and heard and understood.
This whole deep dive has been quite the journey.
It really has. We've explored so many different facets of human nature, from sentimental value to family dynamics to the psychology of revenge.
And we've learned so much about the importance of communication, empathy, and understanding.
Hopefully our listeners have too.
So if there's one thing I hope you take away from this episode, it's this.
What's that?
Before you judge someone or react to a situation, try to walk a mile in their shoes.
Because you never really know what someone else is going through.
And a little bit of empathy can go a long way.
Couldn't agree more.
So on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
I think you're right.
But don't worry, we'll be back soon with another fascinating story from the world of human nature.
Until then, keep those conversations flowing.
And keep exploring. See you next time.